In 2007, I became a trainer, and then I went into Silicon Valley. Do a great job.
There you
Do a
go.
great job in the events you're having. Have a lasting impression. I use several AI tools that have really cut my podcasting production down to 2.5 hours from 6 hours. So I did speak in 2003 at a project manager event in Atlanta, and I was asked never to apply again. Speaking is just as much about you evolving as a speaker as it is about your content. And both of them kind of work in lockstep, and nobody's going to have a magic wand to make you a keynote speaker.
Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today speaking with Miss JJ, and I'm not going to steal her thunder. Who are you, and what are you doing here today?
Hey, Ryan, I love what you're doing. I wish I had this when I started speaking. I had a few speakers in my hometown when I started and NSA, and I was trying to figure this out. In fact, I joined NSA in 1995. I joined NSA in Atlanta. I was not yet a speaker, and I really did not start speaking professionally until 2010. So I was a woman in tech. I worked in cloud computing and infrastructure design out of Silicon Valley. I didn't even know what my topics were. I think I did speak in 2003 at a project manager event in Atlanta, and I was asked never to apply again. And I really didn't get going until my mid 30s. And it was funny because I feel like I always knew I was going to do something, but it took me a long time to manifest.
Awesome. So let's start from there, right? Because I think that's most interesting for the aspiring speakers out there. How did you gain the courage to even show up to the NSA event in the first place, the National Speakers Association event? Because there's a lot that went in to even make that decision initially.
Oh, absolutely. Because it was 8:30 on Saturday mornings. I was just 22 years old. But I was like, let me just check this out. Let me see what this is all about. And I would go, I met some great people there that were also aspiring speakers. So gave me some momentum on just kind of building my tribe, on just seeing what I might be able to put together. And I really didn't do anything with it for probably 6 years. I knew I had to get a speaking role in my company. And so I would say that was my first strategic decision, was try to find roles in high tech that I could be a presenter, because I knew that's where I would learn. In 2007, I became a trainer teaching TCP/IP and LAN WAN design and subnet masking and all this really fun technical stuff. And that kind of got me used to speaking for 6 hours a day or so. And I did that about a year. And then I went into Silicon Valley, where I did training for a while. And then I went into sales and then marketing. And I've done all different roles after I kind of pursued the engineering angle of it. And so each role, I made sure I could get in front of clients or customers and continue to kind of perfect my delivery.
And so, from what was the mindset shift that you had at that first NSA event? Was it a huge paradigm shift, or was it nothing new here? Or how did that affect your mindset at the time?
That was 30 years ago. So I
Yeah,
remember exactly. But, it seemed very theatrical, I would say. It would seem very theatrical. And that is not my disposition. I am a straight shooter. I am cut and dry, and I am quick. So I remember seeing it back then, like a little bit like, ooh, I don't know if I can do this. That's not my delivery mechanism.
Hmm. So from there, after that first NSA event that you went to at 22, which is awesome, you went there, super early already. You went into tech, you went into you say the more corporate lifestyle, is that right?
Yes, yeah. I was already in tech when I started attending. I just
Okay.
was trying to figure out, like, how do I break into the speaking? But I was years away from breaking into it. I just really was going to check out, like, what is it all about? I didn't really know much about speakers, but I was listening to Zig Ziglar. I was reading his books, Og Mandino, Brian Tracy. I actually went and saw Brian Tracy in 1996, 1997 at one of his huge events that he used to put together. And I was just an observer. I was watching the business of speaking to understand, how do they make this work? What were their skill sets? How did they break in? How did they make money? All of those things.
That's a really good point. So what is the business of speaking as you've come to understand it? And obviously you've gotten very fluent enough in it to, be a professional speaker as you are today.
Well, I'll just be totally transparent. I mean, I probably did 200 free speaking engagements when I first started, because I didn't really know my hooks, my messages, who would pay me, what would they pay me. And so in 2000 9, 10, I started speaking. And a lot of speeches I would just do for free or be on panels. And it wasn't until 2012, 13 that I actually started making money at speaking. But again, it was $300, $400. But to me, it was that next level of validation. It took me years to get to the keynote status, which I probably hit in 2017.
And once you hit that keynote status, how did you go about leveling up to get to that next level? Which I don't even know what is the next level
Yeah, I
after
don't
that.
know either. I mean, getting hired back is the next level as far as I see
Mm,
it. So, repeat business is a big deal for speakers. And
mm.
there are many customers that I have worked with 5, 6, 7 times. And I think for me, that's when you know that you have figured out your hook.
Okay. And at what point did a lot of times when speakers are on stage, you're speaking to someone specific. There's an ideal person that your message is perfect for. At what point did you figure out who your ideal audience member was to deliver that message to?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I am my audience, right? So I'm a woman in business that's continuing to work to make a bigger impact than I have today. That is my audience, is women that desire to have more influence and impact than they have today. And I started writing books based on my own journey of being a working woman in a very male dominated field and how not to lose myself in all my yeses. And my next book was all about how to get promoted, how to get on a board after the age of 35, which is very challenging because there's fewer positions and there's a difference of working in your career and on your career. And then my third book, which I just finished, Seeking, is really about how to shift from working kind of on the outside and chasing that oasis of a success to working from the inside out, which really helps leaders and executives align with their North Star to make their lasting impression. And each of those books is directly aligned to my own journey. So I know the content very well. And I also know my ideal audience.
Hmm. Okay, gotcha. That's really cool. I'm noticing that with a lot of speakers as well. I mean, a lot of coaches will have that too. It's, oh, who are you coaching? Who are you speaking to? Oh, me 2 years ago. That's who I'm
Mhm.
talking to. Right now, today, I don't know if you have this data on point or maybe off the cup, you have a general estimation of it. What percent of your gigs come from warm inbound from your speaker site? What percent come from cold outreach that you're doing? And what percent are repeat business?
Yeah. So I will say that when I first started, I hired a woman that helped me while I had my day job. She would just cold call or send emails during the week because I had a dedicated salary in my day job and I was trying to get my speaking business off the ground. And so I hired help to get me in the doors of places because, as you probably know, most of you, bureaus are not picking you up until you're making them money.
Yeah.
So they're not going to pick you up for a $250 or even a $2,000 event, generally, sometimes, but generally not. So I had to find those initial events to start getting really important things, right? I had to get pictures, I had to get video, I had to get testimonials, I had to get names on my speaker website of people I spoke for. And the great thing is, no one says, like, well, how much did they pay you? They just want to see that you have experience. Because when people hire speakers, they want to minimize the risk. They want to make sure they're not hiring someone that's going to blow up their meeting. So making sure that you have a list of clients, testimonials, and pictures to show that you're in action is really important. So even though I spoke 200 times for free, each event I got something in exchange. So for me, I needed to build my reputation and my visual sort of marketplace of what I do. So that was like super duper important. I don't really have a lot of outreach today, to be quite honest with you. I have word of mouth references. Someone's heard me 5 years ago that comes back and says, can you do this event for me? So most of my business is word of mouth, previous experience, or referrals.
Cool. And is there a way to increase the probability of word of mouth gigs as a professional speaker?
Do a great job.
There you
Do a
go.
great job in the events you're having. Have a lasting impression. Be able to, for people to feel something, to feel like they learned something. Your story is great, but I've heard too many speakers only tell their story and not create a bridge for the audience. If you don't create a bridge for the audience to meet you where you're at, then it's just a story. If you can engage them in the discussion and allow them to feel what you're feeling in their own world, their own life, they will not only remember you, but they will often recommend you.
Gotcha. And the next question I'm going to ask is one that I think a lot of speakers have this kind of internal debate. You see a lot of professional speakers out there writing books. Then there's the speaker that they're a professional speaker, but they don't know if they should write a book. were you called to write your books, internally from something, or was there more of an external reason to write them, or how did you go about that decision to write the 3 books, I think it was, that you said you've written now?
I have written 3 books. I will tell you, I help a lot of people decide that. I do a lot of one-on-ones with people writing books. I have a program that I'm helping more people get noticed, because writing a book is one thing, but actually getting it noticed is another thing. And I would tell you that there's a lot of steps you have to think about whether or not you want to write a book. Why are you writing the book and what is it used for? Because a mediocre book may not be worth it. I think may not be worth it. So you really got to think about maybe a course is better for you. I actually see a lot of speakers make more impact, more money, and more alignment with a course than a book. So really getting kind of clarity on how the book is going to help you with your platform is super important. And maybe it's a worksheet, or maybe it is a quiz or something to help people sort of understand where they are and where they want to go. So I would say that I heard for a long time books are important. And I would say they are important, especially if you want to do a lot of keynoting. But I have a lot of people that have a niche, right? They're in manufacturing, or they're in healthcare, or they work with families grieving. And you may or may not need a book. A course might be a better option for you. And so really understanding how those assets are going to help you, how much time they're going to take you to do a good job, and how much they're going to cost, because books can cost a lot of money that do not have direct lines to your impact.
And before we hit the record button here, you were mentioning to me that you've got a lot of tactics and strategies that you've learned that are particularly relevant for professional speakers. What of those tactics would you say that you're using today is one that, when you realized it, when you learned it, when you applied it, it was a big difference maker in your speaking business?
Worksheets, I mean, that's a big deal, right? Because you can leave your content information on the bottom, your LinkedIn connection. I would say worksheets were really big. LinkedIn articles have been very helpful. I have over 100 LinkedIn articles, and that's been really great because people search for SEO terms. And video is super instrumental. So even if I didn't have a videographer, which oftentimes I would hire one, I would create my own videos just from photos. So I really think it's super important that you're able to capture yourself in action.
Yeah, and I think that gives people a view of kind of what it's actually like to have you on stage. For the aspiring speaker out there that has a story or thinks they have a story, kind of like you when you were, in your early 20s, but they're just damn scared of public speaking, because it is one of the scariest things on the planet. I think it's like rated higher, more fear of that than death. What message do you have for that person that's kind of debating, I could help people, but I'm just scared. I cannot get on
Practice.
stage.
Practice with your phone, turn the video on, practice. Practice with stuffed animals, practice with your young kids, practice with your neighbor, practice. I would just say practice sharing your story, because that's how you get really good at delivery, is practice. And like I said, I practiced in my corporate job, just getting comfortable sharing information in a way that people could digest it and act on it. And I think that really is a differentiator, is you have to give content that people can receive in a way that means something to them, and then create action.
Gotcha. Another guest that I was talking to, Brant Menswar, he was telling me about how one thing that's proved really pivotal for him in his speaking career has been masterminds and being part of communities of, people that think at a higher level of where you want to be, and, are where you want to be. What role have masterminds played in your speaking career?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm a huge listener, so I listen to a lot of podcasts that talk about speaking. I have networks of speakers that I talk to on a regular basis. So even though it's not a formal mastermind per se, I have people, especially women, because that's my niche, that I talk to on a regular basis. And we're constantly comparing what's working, what's not. We're sharing resources and even leads. And I think for a lot of us, finding your tribe is so important, and that tribe changes over time.
That's really interesting, because I think that's something that all entrepreneurs deal with when they first, jump ship. They burn the boat, say, "Hey, I'm going to leave the 9 to 5. I'm going to go all in with this business I'm building." Maybe the friends you've had in the past, you don't have all the same empathy and connect on the same level. So when you say change your tribe as you kind of grow in your speaking and in business, how did you go about choosing which relationships to maintain from your past and which relationships would make sense for you to kind of dedicate your energy to?
Well, I would say that kind of happens naturally sometimes, like as you raise your frequency or you increase your impact, things, people just kind of fade away. And then there's some where they used to be really good conversationalists around this particular part of your business, but now they're doing something different and you're going in a different direction and finding other people are doing it. I really believe in staying at events and listening to other speakers too. So I'm always listening to other people's pitches. I go early, I leave late, and people notice this too. Like, oh, you just don't run in and give your speech and leave. But I do it one because if I'm delivering at the end of the day, I want to know what happened all day long so I can tie that into my speech. Or if I'm delivering first thing in the morning, I go to the cocktail hour before because I want to see who is there, what they're talking about, what happened that day if I just flew in, what were the topics they covered. And I meet so many people along my way, and I pick up people that we stay in touch on LinkedIn, and sometimes we have conference calls. And I just think you can find people wherever you're at in your strategy. But I do want to circle just back on a point that you mentioned about leaving your job and having this business. I would really suggest to do it as long as you can off the side of your desk. I mean, I started my women's group in 2008. I wrote my first book in 2010, and I did not leave my day job until 2014. So I really gave it 6 years to cultivate off the side of my desk. And I really didn't leave until I had solid revenue streams. Because once you leave your job, your validity internally or externally or both may go with it. A lot of people hired me because I was working at a really established tech company and I had that collateral to come with me, right? That brand. When I left that tech company, it was just me on my own. And so the big six tech companies weren't hiring me as often because I didn't work at that other tech company. So I think you have to be really careful before you jump ship. And I would say most books cost between 10 and 20,000 to produce. So if you don't have the means, start with a course. A course is a lot more affordable. And even having like a mastermind of your own of people that are getting from point A to point B. And I have a lot of people in my network that help people craft courses to get shifts. And I think for really good speakers, they help. I would say speakers and authors in this business, they help people shift and like figuring out how you're helping people shift based on where they are and where they want to go.
Awesome. And this is one thing I'm just personally curious about. You having worked in tech, the one thing I love about tech is that compare it to accounting, right? You got debit and credit. It's, pretty similar and law is, pretty standard unless the laws are changing. The cool thing about tech is it's like an exploration. There's always new tech coming out and new things to learn about that new tech. And if you don't learn it quick enough, you kind of fall behind, right? And so you being so in tech and kind of seeing these patterns and trends and where things are going, how have you applied your knowledge of technology, which is a much higher knowledge set of tech than the average person, I'm going to assume? How have you applied that knowledge to your speaking business?
Well, it's interesting because, I worked in data centers, so I don't have a lot of experience outside of calling GoDaddy to help me with my website and data centers. But I will tell you is I'm not afraid to try new technologies. So like my podcast, for example, used to take me 6 hours to record, edit, write the show notes, get the hashtags, do all the clips, which I did all manually. And now I use several AI tools that have really cut my podcasting production down to 2.5 hours from 6 hours. So I would say that I'm not afraid to use technology to help me in my work.
Can you share those for the podcasters out there, the speakers that are podcasters?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So my one of my favorite tools is Pod Squeeze. So you just upload the file and it produces pretty much everything within 20 minutes. And if you use the code JJ, you'll get a discount. So Pod Squeeze is one of my favorites. It's two men out of Portugal, which I've talked to several times. So I love that. I also use Opus, which is Opus, right? So I use Opus. I love that. That is a cropping tool for 30 or 60-second clips, which I use a lot, which is really great for building your YouTube channel. And then I also use Podium too. That's another AI tool. It's very similar to Pod Squeeze, so I use that. And there's just several ones. I'm always researching more AI tools to speed up my process because I do a lot on a shoestring budget. I would say I would get most of my resources off of Upwork. And the reason I do it off of Upwork oftentimes is because you can use a business credit card. And if you use a business credit card to pay people, you don't have to create a 1099, which will save you money on your taxes in the long run because you don't have to create all these K1s. So
Sure.
there's just like a lot of little things to do speaking on a shoestring budget. I would not buy into these huge, like, I'll make you a speaker overnight
Mm,
offerings because honestly, speaking is just as much about you evolving as a speaker as it is about your content. And both of them kind of work in lockstep, and nobody's going to have a magic wand to make you a keynote speaker.
that's valuable. And for you, when did you make the decision to start your podcast? Was that already after you had your speaking career kind of massaged out a bit?
Well, it's interesting because my daughter started a podcast first and she was a teenager at the time. And she's like, Mom, you should really do a podcast. And I was thinking about really shifting my business more into a spiritual space. So I actually
Cool.
have two podcasts. I have one podcast for women in business, which had over tens of thousands of listens. And I just closed that in September, even though it was super successful, and opened my second podcast, which is Together We Seek, which is interviewing healers, light workers, and energy practitioners because I've shifted. And I think you have to be where you're at. You can't keep delivering content that worked 4 years ago if you're not there anymore. And I had to honor the fact that I had shifted and let go of things that were kind of in my rear view mirror.
That's super interesting. I think that's there's actually a woman I met with yesterday that I think would be a fantastic guest on your podcast. What is the main, I don't know, it's when you talk about, energy and healing and spiritual stuff, it's such a there's so much information there that is just so unknown. Like you can open a textbook on math and a lot, like you can learn about math. With that kind of stuff, it's a lot of unknowns out there, right? So for you, what has been something you've learned from a guest on your Together We Seek podcast that has kind of reframed how you saw something in, energy and spiritual world and healers and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, yes. Well, I started doing retreats in 2018 because I was sort of guided to do that. And that was aligned with my own personal journey of always seeking outward. Like I was trying to get the award, get the recognition, get the, validation, however that is. And it can keep you super busy, but I was really kind of feeling empty on the inside. And so I had to do some really deep soul searching. And I think some of the best wisdom that came to me that has really helped me is really twofold. So one is life is happening for you. So everything that happens to me is on purpose. I'm not a victim in my own life. And if I lose an opportunity or I miss a plane or whatever happens, this is really happening for me. And I have to find the lesson and gratitude where I'm at. And the second is get rich from the energy you create.
Hmm.
And I feel like I really, coming from high tech where I had a huge salary, I had tons of benefits into coming to be an author and speaker where it still is just a fraction in a lot of ways. I had to find other ways to validate my work.
When you say get rich on the energy you create, that's really interesting. How do you go about getting rich on the energy you create?
Yeah, so it's amazing because I felt like I lived in a very scarcity mindset. And I think a lot of us do are trained early in life that, there's only so much money, there's only so many opportunities, there's only so many promotions. And I really bought into that because that's how I lived. And I would say that now that I really I'm more in the present moment because I've done a lot of internal work and it's made my keynotes and presentations stronger because I'm really in it with the audience and I'm paying attention to what's resonating, how are they feeling, who has frustration with a content or topic that we can dive in and really create an aha moment for other people in the room. And I get so many amazing gifts that come my way, from phone calls to gifts to my next opportunity to people I get to communicate, share time with. It's really unbelievable. And I feel like I was only focused on the dollar all the time. And if I tried to compare that to where I was in my tech career, I often felt like I wasn't good enough. And my life and work shifted. And so I had to shift my mindset too.
That's interesting. And you mentioned paying attention to the audience when you're on stage. And a few other speakers I've talked to on this podcast here, they've mentioned certain strategies that they use to connect with the audience in a certain way and things they've noticed when speakers don't connect in a certain way to that audience. What ways do you connect to the audience? Is it speaking to one person in particular or speaking to four people in particular in the audience at different places, or which kind of strategies do you use to really connect with the audience?
Well, I have had to do a lot of work on myself. I think being a speaker, you have to do the inside work, right? Because if not, you're repelling kind of like your work, and when you're on stage, you're not really building that bridge. And I think the more work I did on myself of really doing the inside work. So I'd go to different energy practitioners, I'd read different books, I'd go to retreats, I'd go to therapists, like really trying to figure out who I am. And I think the more vulnerable I've been, one, the easier it is to connect. And I only use my story as an example of getting through, over, or into a situation. And so I'm not sharing my story as like, hey, pay attention to me. Here's my story. I use my story as, hey, did this happen to you too? And have you
Hmm.
experienced this? And how many of you have been in a situation where XYZ's happen? And so I think really thinking about how you're going to engage the audience from the minute you get in front of them, and using your story as a tool to break open things that they don't normally talk about or don't pay attention to or maybe want to dive into. And using, I do a lot of virtual events now. That's just seems to be an effective way for businesses. So how do you use the chat? How do you use the Q&A? Do you have, ways to use polling and to really get people engaged in what you're talking about? And if you're in person, hand raises, communicate, like breaking out tables that they can talk, having call outs, because this is just, I really see the speaking as a way for them, as a safe space for them to share things that they don't get to share all the time or don't get to talk about at work, but can help them in the long run, recognizing that we're more alike than we're different. And so it comes in all different forms. But again, as the speaker, you are cultivating an opportunity for people to see themselves in a new way, maybe think about what they can let go of, or help them lean into something that's already calling them. And I think that really having that mindset going into these events not only creates a pretty rewarding experience for you and them because you feel like they're like jiving at a level that they didn't, or their energy's higher than when they showed up. But then they reach out and tell you some amazing stories like, because you told me this, I now did this, and this is what this happened. And I think for a lot of times, it's really thinking about helping them lean in or lean out based on what you're talking about. And that's what good speakers do. Good speakers use their life and their experiences as a tool for the listeners to cultivate whatever's calling them or whatever's on their heart.
And the events you speak at, normally how many other speakers are speaking at those events with you?
Oh my goodness, it totally depends. Like sometimes I'm the only speaker. Like I was in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, I was the only speaker, but I only speak to women's groups mostly. So I worked with ERGs, executive women events, industry events that have women breakouts. So that's my specialty. I will sometimes talk to HR departments or executive leaders on how to hire, manage, promote more women or more diversity on their executive staff. But my audience is primarily women in business. And then there's other events I go to, like that are industry events that there's speakers for 5 days.
Wow. Which events are the speakers for 5 days events?
Well, they're industry events. So it could be like
Okay,
a tech conference. It could be
sure.
like there's a manufacturing event I go to that's for, Thursday through Sunday. So I'm just
Wow.
one of the speakers during that day.
Okay. I'm curious about this. When you go on stage and you speak, and there are other speakers at the event speaking, how a lot of personal work to get to kind of where they are. And they're really cool people to just be friends with and talk to and think in a different way or run ideas by. How do you go about fostering those relationships with other speakers that you meet that are speaking on the same stages as you?
Oh, I just sent them a LinkedIn invite, like literally while they're speaking, like, hey, I'm in the audience. I'm speaking next. I'm watching your presentation. I love these 3 points. Love to get a call going or learn more about your work.
I'm going to use that. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easy, and it who you are, why you want to talk to them, the value you provided, the fact you're paying attention. Yeah. And how have you leveraged social media to grow your speaking business? And has there been a particular social, maybe it's LinkedIn that you just mentioned, that you've really put the majority of your energy into that has given you the best ROI?
Well, yes, for sure. I'm women in business. So LinkedIn for me is a no brainer. I have a large women's group, 10,000 women. I have a group on LinkedIn
Wow.
that I started back in 2008, but I also have close to 10,000 followers too. And so I'm a very, very active on LinkedIn. That is where I've put all my time and energy because I'm a B2B speaker. So if you're a B2C speaker, you may, and maybe you talk to moms or maybe you talk to guidance counselors, or maybe you talk to, name it, like bus drivers or men in business or people that are dealing with something in the home. You may choose a different social platform, but you essentially have to find out where your audience is, and that's where you show up. And having a regimen to post every single week with SEO based storylines that people are actually searching for. You can look on Google Trends to see what terms people are looking for and how often, and you can base articles off of that. I would say just be consistent in your posting and stay on topic. You can obviously sway and talk about your own life, but don't be talking about six different topics, all the time, because you'll never get any momentum on any one.
Interesting. And how have you gone about, well, I guess I'll just ask a more specific question about this. Has there ever been a time where you've taken a trend, an SEO trend from Google Trends, you've written the article about it, and you saw, wow, this article has gotten a fantastic response. I'm going to speak about this on stage.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, over the years, it's been a lot of years now. At 14 years, I've been doing this. So yeah, diversity was hot for a while. So I did that. How to, find your gems in your existing work, how to find your like executive gems in your existing workplace, how to, hire more women in tech was big. I've also had, right now I'm talking a lot about mindfulness and purpose, which is kind of softer than usually. Usually I talk about like how to get a board seat, how to get in, the next job, how to, find a sponsor, like very tactical. And it seems like it's shifting a little bit more now of like, how do you round out your experience at work? So I kind of follow the trends, not only of Google, but also of what people are asking me to speak on. And one of the
Hmm.
things that I do too, so if you do have a book or you do have a community or a training, I give it one or two away each time, like a couple books I'll give away, or I'll send, I just had a company right now, what they did, I did a whole speaking event and they sent books to everybody that was on the call. And then I gave them the table of contents and highlighted for the leaders of the ARG chapters that they could self lead discussions on. And so I always kind of think about what is the next step. And then I
Okay.
use my podcast oftentimes as pre-work, like listen to podcast 1 and podcast 7 before I speak. Most people don't do it, but it is value add for event planners.
Sure. That is interesting. This next question I'm going to ask is more personal, but I'm also very curious about this. And I think a lot of speakers probably see it, but maybe they don't acknowledge it very deeply. What spiritual work have you had to do? And I'm assuming you've had to do some because that's your podcast today. What spiritual work have you had to do as your journey as a speaker internally has progressed?
I wrote an entire book on it. 74 key findings to raise your energy, sidestep your self doubt, and align with your life's work. So, this is about 6 or 7 years of spiritual work that I've done. I highlight many of the energy practitioners I work with. But I mean, just a few of the highlights is I had to really understand my relationship with money. I had to understand the relationship with my parents. I had to understand the relationship with perfectionism. And I also had to understand my like times where my confidence as a speaker has walked out the back door, and why did that happen? And so I've done a lot of the internal work that I didn't even know I needed to do when I started speaking. But when you get out there and you are your product, life gets different. It's hard. It's hard. I mean, I've had many months where I'm like, I've have no events, or I had 2 events and one of them disappeared and one of them got shifted. So it's a really lonely place to be at times. And I think finding your own North Star is super important. And for me, that was really like taking care of myself, not only in how I ate, but even how I traveled. Like when I went to events, really having time to take a walk and practice my event, getting to the session early, watching other speakers, but not letting it impact the confidence I had on my piece of the event. And so I think there's a lot of things that speakers have to do that very few other businesses have to worry about.
And one thing you mentioned there, I personally struggled with when I gave my first TEDx talk. I was one of the last speakers at the event, and listening to all the speakers and the anxiety and the stage fright all was just, fermenting in my head the entire time. The speaking gig I spoke at last month in February, I made sure to be one of the first speakers to actually get on stage. So I didn't have to, listen to other people speak before I spoke because it would just start getting in my head. So how do you go about that when you're placed last on the list of speaking? How do you go about maintaining the purity, if you can call it that, or the originality of your talk without all the other stuff kind of coming in.
Yeah. So I have a whole chapter about how my confidence walked out the back door. And this was early on in my speaking career. And that was a super big lesson. So I think when that does happen to you, like noting that, like that's normal. Listen, both of us have been through that, many people. And I used to want the first speaking event. If they asked me if you want the first keynote or the last keynote, I'm like, oh, I want the first for sure. But now that I'm more seasoned, like I said, I probably started speaking in 2002 in my day job and then on my own full time in 14. I kind of believe that I am asked to slot in wherever spiritually makes sense. And just last week, I did a big closing event for a 6-month program for women in business. And I had to listen to all 6 or all 5 months before mine and figure out how to pull all of that together at the end. And I thought it was amazing because I got to learn alongside with them. And then I got to figure out how to weave that into my material, which honestly I couldn't have done a decade ago. I too would have been scared to death. But I really saw it now as an opportunity to do some self learning, things that I probably could have benefited from and earlier on in my career. And I see it as an opportunity to like pull all that together. But I'm also better on my feet now than I was a decade ago, too. So I think really getting whole on your own worth takes time.
Interesting. Time and energy, no play on words there. You mentioned earlier you used to host a retreat. How did you go about making the decision to host the retreat? Because I know some speakers, they speak at enough events. Oh, you know what? I can do this too. I might host an event, that kind of thing. How did you go about making that decision? And then from the point that you made the decision to host your own events, your retreats, how did you go about implementing that and bringing that into reality?
Well, I would say that spoke at so many women's events. I noticed a lot of women were almost like sitting outside their bodies. It's like they were so focused on the corporate event and corporate stuff that they needed to be grounded. And one day I was in Seattle leaving the stage after a lunch event and I got a message to take the women outside. And I was like, the women outside, like we're at a conference, like they're going to their next session. Like I'm not going to be like, okay, come on, everyone, meet me outside. And so I thought it was wacky. I didn't really pay attention to it. And it came back several other times when I was speaking to take the women outside. And so I ended up meeting with an energy practitioner by the name of Dora that I talk a lot about in my book. And I said, Dora, I keep getting this message and this is what it's saying. And she was like, well, what do you think it means? And I'm like, I don't know, like have an event outside in nature because I'm always in these conference rooms. And she's like, well, just put something together that you want to go to. And then if nobody comes, you'll have a day of self care. And it was such a relief to me because I was trying to create an event based on what I thought other people wanted. And when she helped me kind of make that shift to create what I wanted, it didn't seem like so much pressure anymore. And that wasn't until 2018. So I sat on that for 2 years. And when I had my first event, like I talk about this in great detail in my book, Seeking, that the nerves I had the nerves when I posted it. I had the nerves when they were walking into the retreat, like they're going to think they paid too much. This isn't going to be worth it. Like that self doubt was so overwhelming. But I'm happy to share, like, I think I've just hosted my 14th retreat back in
Wow.
January. And, now I have 45 to 55 people coming because that's all I can fit in this new retreat center that I've been granted by the universe. And so I feel like, start where you're at. Start with what you need. Start with what can help you find a partner, find somebody, or do it. I did my first few myself because partnerships for me have been kind of challenging because I feel like sometimes I've been partnering for the wrong reasons. And sometimes it's just easier to do it myself. And now that I kind of know my own flow, it's easier to bring somebody in and feel like a peer. Where before, I don't know if I felt that way on the inside. I've had a lot of self doubt. Even though I've had good accolades and feedback, I still doubt myself. And I still get oh my gosh, I still get so nervous.
That's an interesting point you made about, having a hosting the event with a business partner, right? Whereas someone might come to you at an event and say, hey, you're great up there. I would love to host an event, in 9 months or 8 months with you. How can we go about making this happen? How do you decide if you go forth hosting that event with that person and putting it together with them as a partner? I'm kind of taking you said you just hosted your 14th event. So taking all that
Mhm.
knowledge of choosing partners to build those events with, what have you learned through all those 14 sessions of experience that you would tell that person that's thinking about hosting their first event and looking, do I work with a partner and do this, or do I do this myself?
Yes. Well, you have to kind of know like, and when I say partner, it's equal. When I say I've hired a lot of practitioners to join me, but
Yeah.
I'm hiring them. So I'll have sound healers come. I would have drummers. I'll have an organic chef show up. I will have tappers or different people doing Reiki. I don't necessarily see those necessarily as partners because I'm bringing all the people and I'm putting together an agenda for those people and those people. Partners are when you're splitting it 50-50.
Right.
And I really couldn't find anyone that was doing what I was doing at the time. And so I just did it myself. And I would say that it was a good learning experience. If I had somebody that was a partner that I trusted and we had the same energy, that would have been easy too. But I just didn't have that at the time. And I doubted myself a lot during the first few retreats. And so I had to wait till I got at a point where I had confidence in what I was doing and I believed I brought a lot of value to the table. And when that came about, then I actually had the confidence to team up with someone that I feel like has the same confidence, the same value, and we had the same desired outcome. Because there's a lot of ego in speaking and retreats, a lot of ego. And I'm sure I was there too early on in my career, but the more self work I've done, the more I realize that I'm a conduit for a bigger message and a bigger experience. And I don't have as much ego as I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so making sure that you check your own ego, kind of, why am I doing this? What's the intention? Do I feel good about it? How much self-doubt do I have? Is super important because you don't want to get teamed up. I did have a partnership years ago that I kind of leaned into the partnership because I didn't feel worthy on my own. And so I partnered with somebody that I thought added more or that I thought could help me help my customers, and it was a great representation of how I felt about myself in a lot of ways. And that was not where I didn't feel whole then, and I had to work the last 5, 6, 7 years on what is my value, what am I bringing to the table.
Awesome. And we're coming up on time here. What is one message that you would have for a speaker or a person that's thinking about speaking, or a business owner who speaks to grow their business? And this is coming from your knowledge on podcasting, speaking, making the speakers sites, running the socials, the, SEO and LinkedIn socials, all that knowledge you have. If there was one thing you would want to leave, like a nugget of value, what would that be?
That's a tough question. I mean, a part of me, it kind of is twofold. So, one, I wish I would have started charging more sooner. Once I started charging money, I wish I would have stuck to a little bit more to my fees. I was all over the board because I wanted to get any experience. And it took me a long time to value myself to into certain fees. And I feel like that would have been great. And I could have really benefited from a speaking coach that kind of would have given me confidence when I didn't have it. And then two, I think finding out what you least like to do and seeing if you can outsource that, because the things that you least like to do take up the most energy. And as a speaker, energy is so important and preserving your energy is so important. So finding ways that you can outsource things that you're not good at or don't like to do that fits within your budget, I think would be super important. And the third, which I haven't done that much, but I've seen a lot of speakers, is don't buy into the quick wins. Like people that are saying, oh, if you just give me this much money, I'll get you on this stage or I'll get you ready for this. I haven't seen a lot of those really pan out for my peak speaker friends. And I just feel like you've just got to trust your own journey.
Trust your own journey. Love it. Well, JJ, that was super valuable. I will wrap the recording up here, and thank you all for listening. Cheers, y'all.